Hello. Thank you very much for having me. I hope everybody's keeping safe this close to Christmas and in these uncertain times. I wanted to take you through today what I think are my learnings in 2020 for the world of AI and the value we're extracting for AI. It's been an interesting year, obviously, for many reasons, but it's also been a wonderful year for AI and the evolution of AI, and a lot of interesting and big things have happened. So I'd like to take you through a bunch of those things today that I think are going to be fun and interesting. And I've done it in 5 different lessons. Let's call it lessons, let's call it learnings, which I think will help us understand. The first lesson or the first learning is that AI has become affordable and easily accessible. And what I mean by that is fairly simple. What it means is that it's become a technology that we all have access to. Certainly it's all in our life as we look at our mobile phones, we look at our devices, we look at this smart camera that's auto-focusing on me and doing all sorts of interesting things. It's been in our life, certainly in our work life. So at all levels, it's something we can access. From my 14-year-old who can learn Python and access APIs to do all sorts of interesting things to capture faces, to obviously businesses in a much more complex way using it to fulfill all sorts of their interesting problems, from optimizing some very, very complex supply chains to simplifying some of their interaction with their customers via robots. It really is the era of implementation, as Dr. Kai-Fu Lee very, very nicely puts in his book, The AI Superpowers. So first lesson, it really has become affordable and easily accessible. Not easy, but affordable and easily accessible. So if you're using, you're winning. And one of the things I think we need to talk about is, in some of our research this year, we also found in part of this chapter that a lot of the business leaders are starting to see and think that if they are not really using this technology and if they're not scaling its value, they're going to be, let's say, in difficulty in the following years in being successful and in being competitive. And some of the interesting numbers we got out of our Scale AI research was things like 75% of executives feel that they will struggle with how AI will scroll across the business, but at the same time 84% of them believe that if they're not scaling this value that artificial intelligence brings to the business, that they might actually have no business, which sounds slightly tremendous, but again, this is direct feedback from people that tell us what they think. So lesson number 1, we need to be implementing is the area of implementation. Lesson number 2 is that the people that are doing incredibly well with AI, what we call our scalars, are people that do this lesson very well, which is this idea of defining and finding value. So what is the things that we're going to do in our business that are going to make our customers, our citizens, whatever relationship we have with our customers or our citizens, what's going to matter? What's going to help us be successful? What's going to help us grow if that's a parameter? Or what's going to help us to give better service if that's a parameter? Or lower cost if that's a parameter? So what are those things? And the businesses that do very well tend to be very good at doing this. And let me give you a couple of clues that I find help me think about these things. First one is that if you think about value, and I'll give you a proof point first. We know through our research that the companies that scale artificial intelligence, in the sense that they're doing use cases in production, it's going out, that they became able to use it very successfully, tend to get a great return on that investment. So it's worth doing. Let's go there. But then, how do we inspire ourselves to do the right things? My rule of thumb is to think of 10 times, not 10%. So whatever we're doing, I mean, this is a technology that, as we'll see in a couple of the lessons we're going to talk about in a bit, that has quite a lot of impact across the entire company. So it's worth looking at use cases that bring us 10 times the value, 10 times the saving, 10 times the impact. Not a margin of impact, but a multiplier of impact. It's very important because these are the value use cases, the things to do, the important missions that will change our company, change our relationship with our citizens, whatever it is that we're trying to do. It has to have that multiplier impact. This technology has the ability to do that. So interesting way of seeing it for the people that are doing very well is to think 10 times. The other lesson I will give you in part of this this point of value is that AI is what I call a portfolio problem. in the sense that you don't look at one opportunity, one use case, one thing to do. It's actually quite useful to think of a number of things to do in a simple basket that we call AI. Why? Because AI is fundamentally a research type of activity, in the sense that we have to prove it. We have some data that may have or may not have an answer or a pattern or some insight that we want. Then we have a set of mathematics that are applied to that may or may not solve the problem depending on the data. So this all has to be proven out before we're in a place where we can say with some degree of certainty, this is going to have an answer to my exam question. So this makes it, this uncertainty, let's say, of an outcome always makes it difficult to make decisions about investment. Should I do this use case? Should I not? Will it bring me the outcomes I want? Will it not? Will it help my citizens? Will it not? So it's actually quite useful to think of it as a portfolio of things, 10 things we want to do, where we have the belief that as a portfolio, this will definitely bring the value. And then it becomes much easier to actually come back into our investment funding or our government, or whoever is funding this value, and actually have a conversation around how that's going to be released, which is super important. Next lesson within this category is the point of scaling. So first lesson we're using in whatever capacity is right for our business or our government or our team. We're using. Second one is we found the formula of how to achieve value and derive value and define value for ourselves. What is value? What isn't? What's worth doing? What's not worth doing? The next part is, right, let's go and do those things, but let's go and do quite a lot of them if possible. And here's where I actually think it gets really most interesting and most difficult. Let's look at a few of the lessons within that. First of all, the people that do scaling fairly well tend to do the basics well. The basics for me, there's a danger that it sounds slightly patronizing, but the bigger the company or the bigger the business, the more difficult these things are, or the government, sorry, the more difficult these things are. So doing the basics brilliantly can be very hard. But think of the basics as simple things like accountability, simple things like who does what, where, when. What gets funded and what doesn't, clarity on what we fund and we don't fund, clarity on what we want to do and what we don't want to do. All of those things, I say, which are simple things in the way we run companies, when it comes to AI, because it is complex, because it has an element of research or experimental, get compounded as problems. So the research very clearly tells us that the people that scale well tend to do the basics well, right? So that's interesting learning number one. Learning number two is that we're at a point now where we probably, if we had to dial something within the company, let's say speed versus learning in this case, we should dial into speed. All the tools are there, all the research is there, all of the examples are there. So if we wanted today to do scaling, and again, the research supports this, and certainly my personal experience supports it, it is the time to dial speed over basic learning. Doesn't mean we shouldn't learn. Obviously, learning is super important for all of us, but speed is key when in such a competitive market where our customers are so demanding of what they want from us as companies and governments. And the place where the technology is today, speed is something that we can achieve, and there's many ways to achieve this. I've given you an example, for example, here, which is we can think about reuse before buy and buy before build as a formula to do this. For example, building your own things takes time, but do it for the right reasons. Build things for the right reasons, and absolutely correct. But don't build things that are easily available that your competitors have. Just get that done quickly. Move along, understand where you're at. So speed over the basic learning, certainly something that the scalers do well. They think of how we get there fast. Another lesson that I think is worth thinking about in the chapter of scaling is that scaling anything in technology, but certainly in AI, is a team event. And I can give you some examples here, but we've got obviously an entire workforce that has to be aligned to doing this. AI is for everyone, not just for data scientists or data engineers. It's for everybody, so we all have to take part. We've got our marketing functions, the people that help us, sell our products. So there's the industry that we live in, the regulators and the others that participate in what we do as a company. If I'm a bank or I'm a heavily regulated life sciences company, right? Obviously, we've got tools and technology and IT, and it takes my advice to you is that it takes a village. It takes an entire village, not just a hut. So think of everything that needs to be true in your company or in your government, that you need to bring together and educate so they can all work within these problems. As a data scientist and engineer by trade and education, I will tell you now that one of the interesting things about AI is that the core of it is machine learning in many cases, and data scientists and engineers, but data scientists in particular. It's important that we think about data science as a profession, not a skill. It is in the same way that we have doctors or architects, software engineers and such, which are all professions. Data science is a profession. It's getting there in its maturity, but it is a profession. So think about how that profession lives within your world, your company, your government. How does that live? What are their ambitions? What is their medium and short term and long term future? Right? Create that profession within your organization and make it fit within what we're doing, all the projects, all our ambitions, the rest of the organization. Make it fit within there. It's important because, as I say, it's a profession, not a skill. Obviously, continued skill may lead to profession, but it is important that we create that professional environment to scale out. The next lesson I would give you is data. Think of data. Without data, we have no AI. AI doesn't exist without data. So there may be a lot of work that you have to do in data to get you to the point where AI is going to give you the best value. It's one of those. It's a massive chapter. It's a super important chapter. But say the scalars, the people who do very well, tend to have a grasp on the data that they need in order to deal with the use cases that are most important. Back to our chapter on at the top, and are very clear on what those are. Excuse me. So that's pretty important. Right, which leads us to the next chapter, or the next learning, which is people capability and culture. AI, yes, it's a technology, yes, it's a science, yes, it's a science with engineering and data and all comes together, and it has to be integrated into a company, and a company is made out of people. And we have to learn very clearly what it is that we have to do in the company in order for the people to come along with us for the journey. And what we found through the research is that we need to educate people on what AI is and data. So the levels of education have to go up and up and up. It's important throughout the organization. It's important that we have alignment between all the levels. So if our CEO, our chairman, our VP, the senior folks that are talking about AI as part of their ambition, that ambition is clearly going down to the people that are actually doing the work, and it's connected and it's alive and it's understood. So, and that is super important. What I call the distance between the top and the bottom has to be very, very small, as opposed to intuitively very, very far away. It has to be very close in order for things to happen, right? Look outside your organization. There's an entire market of things that companies and richness and partners that you can use them to your advantage. It's interesting when you look at some of the statistics and how the scalers tend to have a much larger percentage of their people that fully understand. And I say fully understand to where they are at in their need. They understand much better their place and their role as it regards to AI in the organization. It's also interesting to see the numbers of scalers that do better when they've got, because they have higher numbers of people who are formally trained. So think about formal training as a key part of this. And of course the experience. Being trained and being educated is fine, but key part to be able to use is experience. So how do we set ourselves up so people can gain the experience? Back to the professionalization. We're giving them a professional environment in which to grow, learn and experiment and become more valuable to the company. And the last chapter I'll give you, which I think is last but not less important, is the idea of proceeding responsibly and building trust. I will tell you, it's a world. It's a new technology. It's certainly we're starting to see more and more use cases that are surprising us, and it's a technology because it has the ability to expand what we're able to do in the domain of thinking, right? versus other revolutions, which allowed us to expand our physical world. The opportunities are endless. So we have to think a little bit about what we're doing. We have to think about its impact to society, where we stand in the impact we want to have on that society and our citizens and our customers, which are it's super important. So building responsibility and building that trust is a key part of this. And some of this has to do with dealing with fairness, dealing with how our employees feel about what we do, being very open about what we're doing, create a manifesto that declares what it is that we feel we're going to do and what are our ethical foundations as regards to data and as regards to the use of data, AI being a use of data. But then also being very proactive about setting up guidelines that help us control this as we're learning, as we're growing, as we're scaling, as we're doing more use cases. Let's create the guidelines and the safeguards, let's call them, that allow us to look at use cases, evaluate them very fully, bring people into the mix, all the people into the mix that we think have something to say about this use case. Ethicists, social scientists, lawyers, our risk and compliance friends. Let's make sure we have all the people in the mix that can give us all the lateral thinking and the implications, sort of 3 steps ahead of what we're doing and how that may impact our customers, our citizens, society, our shareholders, etc. It is as we did the research, it was interesting to see some of the numbers around how people felt about what we call human in the loop. So making sure the decisions that impact us directly have a human in the loop to make sure that overlay of humanity is added, which is exactly right, totally the right attitude. So we should listen to this feedback of society and listen to how our citizens and our people feel, so we can act accordingly. Very, very important. So as we think about these lessons, we've learned that it's the era of the implementation, right? It's the time of use. So if we're probably winning, right? Secondly, we've talked about what it takes to find and define value, right? What is value to us? Why is it worth doing? And if it's worth doing, the next step is, how are we going to do more of that? How are we going to do more and more of these use cases? What is the lessons? We talked about that 10 times use cases. Let's look for the 10 times value. 10 times savings, 10 times impact. But let's look for that multiplier of impact. But then let's do more of it. And we talked a little bit about the challenges of that scaling, how it's a team event, right? It's about speed today. It's about developing at a speed, which is critical. Then we talked about our people, our capabilities. We talked about educating people. We talked about raising the bar of that education, so people feel that they are part of this journey of AI, because they are like any other revolution of technology, where we're all in it together. And finally, we talked about, and no less importantly, we talked about building trust and building it responsibly. So as we're doing this, like with any technology revolution, let's do this together in a way that's good for all of us. It's good for society, it's good for the individual, it's good for companies, it's good for governments. Let's do it in a way that we're all in it together. And with that, I think those are my 5 lessons that I think 2020 has taught us in a bit of a hard way due to the difficulties of COVID and such. But hopefully everybody's keeping very safe. Enjoy the event. And please do feel free to send us questions and thoughts. We're always more happy to talk them through. But with that, I will leave you. Again, I will say, please keep safe and within these difficult times, and have a wonderful event. Thank you very much.